Hello guys and girls, happy Friday. Welcome back. I have another video lesson for us today. I sent the remind this morning letting you know that worksheet number 11 is in the OneNote content library. You're looking at the worksheet right here. It's titled Marbury versus Madison. I'll explain today's lesson in a moment. A few reminders. It's Friday. We're completing our first full week of remote learning. I mentioned a take-home quiz earlier this week, but I'm going to hold off until Mr. Doherty and the superintendent finalize the game plan for actual grading during the home learning. For now, I'm keeping a checklist of who completes each lesson on OneNote and who turns in the assignments that have been graded, like the flip grid and yesterday's Thomas Jefferson video questions. So I'm going to send out a checklist later on today about all the regular lessons that are in OneNote and the 2 assignments that have been graded so far. Let's get started with today's lesson. As you can see, the title of today's lesson is Marbury versus Madison. I'm going to change views here and go to my PowerPoint. The aim of today's lesson is how did Marbury versus Madison strengthen the power of the Supreme Court? You may have already assumed that Marbury versus Madison is the name of a court case. So today we're going to learn about our first Supreme Court case, and it's a huge court case in American history because it gave the Supreme Court its superpower, the ability to declare laws unconstitutional. Before we get into the court case, let's go back to Thomas Jefferson. Pause the video. I want you to take a minute or two to read the Do Now speech and answer number 1. Okay, hopefully you had a chance to read the speech on your own. Today I'm going to do the reading together with you guys. Jefferson's inaugural speech. Let us then, fellow citizens, unite with one heart and one mind. Every difference of opinion is not a difference in principle. We have called by the different names brethren of the same principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. Still one thing more, fellow citizens, a wise and careful government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. This is the sum of good government. As you see here, this is from Thomas Jefferson's inaugural speech. Those of you that did the video questions yesterday probably remember this quote from yesterday's video. So let's see what some of the correct answers for the Do Now question number 1 were. What does Jefferson mean when he says we are all Republicans, we are all Federalists? Jefferson is saying that even though we are from different political parties, we should still be in it together. We should have the same goals. And this is a great message today. If you're watching the news coverage for the COVID virus and you're hearing things that the president is saying, or you're hearing things that the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, are saying, a lot of times they're talking about political disagreements getting in the way of fixing problems that the country has. And that's the message here in the Do Now quote. Jefferson is saying, listen, we're all Republicans. We're all Federalists. We should be in it together. We should be doing what's best for the country. And the one word he uses in the Do Now reading that I love is that word brethren. He talks about how we're all brothers of the same principle. Jefferson was a really smart guy, a really smart president. His words still ring true today. Hopefully you got a chance to read that Do Now and answer number 1. All right, let's get started with today's lesson. And today's lesson is about a court case called Marbury versus Madison. So you can see here some of the key players. We're going to talk today about outgoing President John Adams. And we're going to talk today about the incoming president, Thomas Jefferson. But we're also going to learn about two other key players. William Marbury and James Madison play a huge role in this court case today. And we're also going to talk about Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Marshall. These five guys were the key players in what really is the most important Supreme Court case in United States history. What the heck did it have to do about? You see my meme right here? It had to do with somebody getting hired for a new job. So I want you to think about this scenario. What would you do? All right. You can pause the video and maybe write down your thoughts or think about this. What would you do if you were hired for your dream job and the day you show up at the office, first day at your dream job, there's a new boss. And that new boss tells you, oh, I'm sorry, Joey. I'm sorry, Susie. We're not hiring you anymore. You're like, what? What the heck are you talking about? I got hired by the old boss. He said I should start today, April 1st. The new boss tells you that the old boss never submitted the paperwork. So when you show up at the office for your dream job, there's a new boss. He never submitted the paperwork. What would you do? I want you to pause the video, think about it, maybe discuss it out loud. All right, so hopefully you gave it a little thought. The guy who was hired was this man down here, William Marbury. We're going to learn about him in a moment. And he was hired by President Adams to be a federal judge. Kind of like a Supreme Court judge, but not that high up in the judicial branch of government. The thing is, Adams hired Marbury right at the end of his presidency. Remember that Adams had lost the election to Thomas Jefferson, and Adams was not a stupid guy. He said, you know what? Before Jefferson takes office, I'm going to try to hire as many of my guys as possible. So Adams got busy hiring Federalist judges, packing the Supreme Court, packing the federal courts with Federalists because they were his guys. Once Jefferson takes office, he gets wind of this because his Secretary of State, James Madison, reports to Jefferson that there's a bunch of new judges that were just hired. And there's a bunch of paperwork for me to submit. James Madison asks his new boss, Thomas Jefferson, what should I do? And Jefferson tells Madison, no way. No way are we hiring all those Federalist judges. Do not submit the paperwork. So this case winds up in the Supreme Court. This guy here, Chief Justice John Marshall, was the head of the Supreme Court. And today we're going to learn about how this Supreme Court decision really shapes the future of the Supreme Court that we know today because it gives them their superpower. So here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to go to this video, pause mine, and on your OneNote worksheet, open up this intro video, and this intro video is going to introduce you to the Marbury versus Madison case. Go ahead and play that video. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed that video, and it's a very good introduction to the Marbury versus Madison case. We are going to begin here on your worksheet with these key terms. So on my PowerPoint, I'm going to go over each of these key terms, and on my PowerPoint, you're going to see the definitions. If I go too fast, you can pause my PowerPoint with the definitions and copy the key terms and people. So I'm going to switch over there now. All right, so Marbury versus Madison. The absolute most important part of this Supreme Court case is judicial review. Judicial review is a fancy way of saying unconstitutional. Still today, the power of the Supreme Court is a power to declare laws unconstitutional. And that happened for the first time in the Marbury versus Madison case. It is a precedent. Like we learned about George Washington establishing precedents. Think about this question. Which branch of government had the shortest section in the Constitution because they were given the least power? Hopefully you remember it was the judicial branch. The judicial branch was not given much power in the Constitution. So this court case was a precedent because it becomes the first time the Supreme Court uses that unknown power to declare a law unconstitutional. If you look on your worksheet, the law that they overturned in the Marbury versus Madison case was an older law, the Judiciary Act of 1789. And that law, based on what the court decided in the Marbury versus Madison case, that law was ruled to be unconstitutional, meaning they decided that the Judiciary Act of 1789 violated the Constitution. Now, I want you guys to get working copying these definitions, so let's go one by one. The first new key term is unconstitutional. When something is unconstitutional, it is a law or government action that goes against the Constitution. When you see that prefix un, you know that means no, it doesn't. It goes against, it doesn't agree. So something that is unconstitutional goes against the Constitution. Today's new case is Marbury versus Madison. It is considered a landmark case, an important case, a noticeable Supreme Court case because it established that power of judicial review for the court. The midnight justices. This is the cool part of the case. John Adams, who knew his presidency was ending, and he knew he was being replaced by someone from the other political party, John Adams basically tries to sneak in his judges last minute before his term ends. It's not illegal. You're allowed to try to do this. But Jefferson and his supporters, namely his Secretary of State, James Madison, refused to hire the midnight justices that Adams tried to appoint. This is one of those examples of checks and balances. Adams has the ability to appoint federal judges. When the new president comes in, he does not complete the paperwork on those appointees. And then last but not least, Chief Justice John Marshall. He is one of the most famous Supreme Court judges of all time. He was in that position for 34 years. He was a Federalist. As you can see in the definition, most of the Supreme Court cases that he helped decide on strengthen the federal government. If he is a Federalist, he wants to give more power to the federal government. And so his Supreme Court case decisions did exactly that. If you're still copying the definitions, pause my video right here where you have the definitions on screen. We're going to go to the readings on page 2. All right, so you should be here. You've got a big reading on the Supreme Court case. When you learn about court cases, it's usually important to learn the background of the case first. So I want you guys to take however long you need to complete the entire reading and answer questions 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to go over the questions with you. I'm not going to do this whole reading with you. Take as much time as you need. Pause my video and go. All right, so hopefully you did a nice job on that reading. Let's go over the questions. Marbury versus Madison, Supreme Court case. Number 1, why did Adams appoint 58 people to new jobs before he left office? He wanted to hire judges from his political party before he left office. In the reading, you may have used this part right here for your answer. It says Adams had appointed William Marbury to be Justice of the Peace. Marbury was one of the midnight judges or last-minute appointees. And it says above that Adams quickly appointed 58 members of his own party to fill government jobs created by Congress. He did this because he wanted people from his political party in office. So everything I highlighted there helps answer question number 1. Question 2. Why do you think Jefferson told Madison not to deliver the paperwork? I think this kind of goes with number 1. Jefferson did not want to complete the hiring of 58 Federalist judges. You know, that's a sneaky move by Adams trying to pack in 58 Federalists for this new president, Thomas Jefferson, who's a Democratic Republican. Number 3, why did William Marbury sue or take to court James Madison? In the reading, it explains that Marbury sued Madison to get his job. Let's go back to the reading. He was arguing, so if you look here, Marbury was arguing that he was entitled to the job and that the Judiciary Act of 1789 gave the court the power to force the Secretary of State to appoint him. This is where things backfired on William Marbury. Not only does he not get his job, the Supreme Court decides that the Judiciary Act of 1789 was unconstitutional. So an interesting side story to all of this, William Marbury, one of the judges who did not have his paperwork filed, sues James Madison, Secretary of State, for Thomas Jefferson. So remember, look at this little drawing here. Marbury is suing Madison, but because the Supreme Court wound up declaring that law, the Judiciary Act of 1789, unconstitutional, I have it in the margin of your worksheet here, the Supreme Court winds up saying, you know what, we think that law was unconstitutional, therefore William Marbury never gets his job. Because that law was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, William Marbury never gets hired as a federal judge. So it's a really interesting case, and the midnight justices were kind of John Adams' last-ditch effort to kind of, mess with his rival political opponent, Thomas Jefferson, and it backfires. His judges are not hired. Go ahead and answer question number 4. The court's decision. And answering question number 4 would bring you right back to the definitions. Here, define unconstitutional. And we did that. Let me find my definitions. There we are. So your answer to number 4 should match the definition that we gave for unconstitutional here on the worksheet. All right. Last summary. Go back on OneNote. And I want you to scroll up to these 2 multiple choice questions on the bottom of page 1. I'll show them to you on my slideshow. All right, here we go. 2 summary questions. Pause my video, answer them both, and we'll go over them. All right, welcome back. So, multiple choice questions. We've done this a lot in school before we had our break here. The case Marbury versus Madison was a landmark Supreme Court decision. Let's get rid of all the stuff that you may not need to understand to get this question right. Marbury versus Madison Supreme Court decision. What do I remember about the Marbury versus Madison Supreme Court decision? It definitely didn't reinforce the power of the president. This is a Supreme Court case. It definitely didn't increase the power of the Federalists in the legislative branch. So you should be stuck between these two because both of these answers mention the Supreme Court. Hopefully you guessed correctly. The answer is 1 because the key word is unconstitutional. Marbury versus Madison, unconstitutional. That key term, which will answer number 2 for you, judicial review. Look at that key term. When judges review laws, they can decide if they think the law is constitutional or not. Judicial review is when they think a law is unconstitutional. Let's go to number 13 or number 2 on the bottom. Once again, narrow the question. Marbury versus Madison, you don't need the year. Expanded the power of the Supreme Court. And I see that key term right away. So the correct answer is 2, judicial review. Today's lesson is a different type of topic. It's the first time we've done a Supreme Court case. I know I went kind of fast on the video, but the good thing about this is you can pause it. You can go back. If you're really confused, rewatch the YouTube video that is in the margin of today's lesson. I would tell you to rewatch this if you're confused. Now that I've kind of finished the lesson, rewatch, see if it makes sense. If you're still confused, maybe redo the lesson. Erase everything and restart my YouTube mini lesson. If you're still confused after that, email me. This is a tough topic. Please reach out, email me, and I will help you. We can set something up. All right? Hopefully you enjoyed this. Happy Friday, guys. I will be back in touch on Monday.